Let's talk now, though, to Peter Cardwell, TalkTV's, TalkRadio's political editor, I should say. Peter, welcome.
Hi,
Thank
Mike.
you very much indeed. You've been a busy man this morning, I know, looking at the 100-page document, which is an awfully large document, isn't it, to record all of these things that supposedly Boris has done. Tell us what he's supposed to have done.
Well, really, it's about, in terms of how much he has misled Parliament. That's what the Privileges Committee say. They're saying in light of his contempt of Parliament, they say he misled the House of Commons. They say he misled the committee. They said he breached confidence. He said he impugned the committee and thereby undermined the democratic process. This is about as damning as it gets, Mike. 90-day suspension.
He's not their favourite man, is he?
He's not. And they suggested he be suspended for the House of Commons for 90 days. Now, as far as I can remember, the only longer suspension that I can remember was Keith Vaz, or Jim, the washing machine salesman, as he called himself, who was attempting...
A slightly more egregious breach, you might have said.
Look, who amongst us can honestly say we haven't procured cocaine for rent boys at one stage in our career?
Speak for yourself.
But, no, I certainly haven't. But I mean, that was the longest one that I've seen in terms of his, in terms of a suspension from Parliament. But 90 days is huge. And also this.
And it's interesting. The one I was going to ask you was because remember when he appeared before the committee, and then there was a lot of speculation afterwards that it was all a bit sort of bad-tempered, and probably what they wouldn't do was suspend him for long enough to force a by-election. So what changed between the day of his giving evidence to now?
Well, what we haven't seen is the reaction in the report and whether things changed between the time that Boris Johnson, I'm sure it'll come out at some stage, but Boris Johnson was given the report on Friday. He then revealed some of it, or some of it got into the public domain by some mechanism anyway, and then he resigned and had a pretty damning statement as a result of that. They say, the Privileges Committee said that in itself is actually contempt of Parliament, because you're not waiting for these things to come out when they're meant to come out.
So that's one of the contempts that they've accused him
That's
of.
one of them, So in terms of the 90 days, whether that was after that, whether it was before that, Boris Johnson, of course, his lawyer put some more evidence to the committee on Monday night at 3 minutes to midnight as well. Whether that aggravated things as well, we don't know. But certainly 90 days is huge. The threshold, of course, is this 10-day threshold. Then a few things happen. So if he had still been an MP, of course, none of this kind of really matters because he isn't an MP anyway. But if it had been below 10 days, he'd just been suspended, unprecedented.
And there would have been no by-election.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas after 10 days, then you get into, you can possibly have a recall petition, which means that, which would have been organised, of course, by Labour and the Lib Dems. They would have 10% of the electorate in Boris Johnson's constituency, Uxbridge and South Ruislip in North West London. They would have then gone for a by-election, which, given the polling at the moment, he may well have lost.
I mean, on the upside, he can take advantage of the opportunity to go on holiday to Mustique while affairs are a bit cheaper because school holidays haven't actually started yet.
Although whether he would have paid for it himself, of course,
well, I mean, maybe he won't be able to do that anymore now that he's no longer an MP. But, you know, I mean, it does seem a bit over the top, doesn't it? I mean, all of this, and lots of the people who are talking to us this morning saying, you know, nobody believes Boris Johnson is innocent of anything. Nobody thinks that he is, you know, the world's greatest politician or indeed the world's greatest Prime Minister. But this does smell, doesn't it, of looking at the people who are doing the rounds this morning, Dominic Grieve, Chris Bryant, and all the people who are talking about this and sort of sticking the knife into Boris Johnson. It does seem like a very vitriolic response to something which is relatively, you know, dealt with in a way. You know, it's sort of over and above what he's already been punished for. You know, he resigned as he was kicked out as Prime Minister, he's now resigned as an MP, and yet this still continues to go on. And now they want to ban him from the parliamentary estate. Yeah,
that's right, not even giving him a parliamentary pass.
He can't even come in for a cup of tea.
Well, this isn't, well, he could if he went through security, I suppose, but in terms of what he's actually being punished for, this is about misleading the House of Commons, and that's about as serious as you can get in terms of what an MP.
He denies it, of course.
Of course he does, and he has an absolutely barnstorming response to this, over 1,600 words in terms of what he's saying. The committee, it's a witch hunt, it's a kangaroo court, it's a conspiracy against him. That's certainly what he believes, and his statement is one of the longest and most vociferous statements I've ever read from a politician. So he is not accepting any of this and says that there'll be a, you know, sort of line by line rebuttal of this 30,000 word report. So this is going to go on. But the fact is, you know, the two questions I think you've got to ask are, one, was it proportionate? And two, does it actually matter? Because he's not an MP anymore. It's what they would have done.
I mean, this is kind of almost, I mean, this to me is like, this would be a Senate hearing on an impeachment inquiry into a sitting president. That's almost the seriousness with which they're treating it. Whereas we're dealing with a man who's no longer the Prime Minister, not now even any longer an MP. and with no likelihood of becoming an MP anytime soon, and not really even a persona grata inside his own party. So it all seems a little bit over the top.
Their point, I suppose, would be, look, this is what he did when he was Prime Minister. This was the leader of our country. In the Privileges Committee view, misleading the House of Commons, which is very, very serious. And certainly, it doesn't amount to a hill of beans, I'm not sure. Boris Johnson's always going to believe what he believes. The Privileges Committee is always going to believe what it believes, and has set it out in great detail in terms of why they believe that he lied and lied again. So, people will draw their own conclusions from this. I'm not sure too many people's minds are actually going to be changed by this report, because they'll have come to the conclusions already.
But also, if I were to ask you, where have you seen before any previous Prime Minister or any MP even being treated with this amount of kind of punishment? I don't think you could name one, could you?
I don't think I can, but at the same time you can ask, well, has there been a Prime Minister who's done what Boris Johnson has done? Certainly Tony Blair lied to Parliament, no doubt about that. Some people think he should be in The Hague for war crimes. And he did something
far more serious, because he took this country into war.
Yeah,
people
absolutely.
died. And I mean, people will say, of course, who hate Boris Johnson, well, people died in COVID. It's not quite the same thing as invading another country.
I absolutely agree with that.
And I always find it rather ironic that Alistair Campbell's one of the chief critics of Boris Johnson, given the fact that he, as I've said before many times, has never seen a fact that he hasn't wanted to twist to his own particular agenda.
I think when Alistair Campbell's taking the moral high ground, you're in trouble.
You really are, absolutely. What about the old Bernard Jenkins scenario? Because a lot of people are interested in this one, because it does appear, from what I can read and see, that Jenkins has been attending parties, hasn't he?
Well, it's interesting that this allegation, certainly from the Guido Fawkes website. Now, I've approached Bernard Jenkins about it. He hasn't got back to me. He hasn't given me a statement. I've invited him to come on TalkTV whenever he wants to talk about it. But the allegation is that his wife, Anne Jenkins, who's a Baroness Anne Jenkins, had her 65th birthday. This was during Tier 2 lockdown, December 2020. And the allegation is that Bernard Jenkins, who's a member of this committee, one of the people who's been very damning about Boris Johnson, that he attended this in breach of lockdown. Now, he so far doesn't appear to have denied that. He said he didn't attend any drinks parties during lockdown, but on the specific allegation, that hasn't been specifically denied so far that I've seen anyway. So, the point from Boris Johnson is he's saying, well, how can you be in judgment of me when you allegedly broke these...
Which is a fair question.
It is a fair question. Bernard Jenkins hasn't responded to that. I think he'll be hoping this story just goes away.
Yes, it's not going to, though, is it?
No, it's not. Because we're going to keep asking.
Despite the fact that, as well, that there are many things that people would rather the government was getting on with, that they would rather not see the Tory party sort of taking lumps out of one another. That seems entirely what they wish to do to each other. And I suppose nothing sums up the last days of Rome than this kind of behaviour.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, if you look at the front pages of the papers today, of course, there are many things to do with the horrendous attack in Nottingham yesterday, but tomorrow's front pages are probably all going to be about this Privileges Committee report and the fallout from that. Yet, if you look at the one paper today that has something that actually affects people, every single person in this country, on the front pages, the Financial Times, talking about mortgage rates and the fact that they could go up to the interest rates in this country could go up to 5.75%. And I think people dealing with the cost of living, dealing with paying their electricity, gas bill, food bills and all the rest of it will sort of say, well, Boris Johnson, is this actually that relevant to my daily life? And I think that, I mean, it is in the sense that we want our leaders to tell us the truth, and the allegation is
I'm not sure that even that's true, actually, because, a spot check of some of the views that I'm getting here is people have lost so much faith in politicians. They don't actually expect them to tell them the truth. They just assume that whatever they say for the purposes of that day's news and that day's rolling events. And then tomorrow they'll say something completely different. I mean, look at Keir Starmer. He keeps saying he's going to do one thing. Next week he's changed his mind, he's doing something else. Now, in normal worlds, that would be called a lie. But in politics, it's called a U-turn or a flip-flop or a change of mind.
Did you know the Conservative Party are selling on their merchandise website Keir Starmer flip-flops?
I've seen that,
for £16.99.
Yeah, I think they're a bit of an overreach there. I think they should be giving them away. I mean, yes. Well, who's going to pay
$16.99 for a pair of flip-flops?
No, I'm not doing it.
Quite expensive.
I'll wait till the fire sale, I think. Peter, thank you very much indeed. Peter Cardwell there, Talk Radio's political editor.